Hi, folks. Welcome to Experiential Realism. Today, I'm interviewing a very special guest, the philosopher and psychologist John Buchanan, who was kind enough to send me a copy of his book, Processing Reality. It describes an awesome journey in life with ups and downs, and it's extremely insightful about the way our minds work and the nature of reality. I highly recommend it, so we'll be discussing it. We're going to be talking about the ideas of Alfred North Whitehead, Bertrand Russell's teacher, who was influenced by William James, the father of American psychology, who wrote beautifully about mystical experiences. We'll cover psychedelics, process thought, transpersonal psychology, and the very philosophy that John Buchanan uses to revitalize the intellectual and spiritual foundations of Western civilization. We may we may use speculative philosophy, the methods employed by Whitehead in his magnum opus to reconcile science and religion. John's book is a treat and also provides an in-depth introduction to the work of Stanislav Grof, the man who came up with the concept or posited the existence of a transpersonal and conscious realm beyond Carl Jung's collective. Without further ado, I give you John H. Buchanan. Hi, John. Welcome to Experiential Realism, and thank you so much for sending me a copy of your book, Processing Reality. It's an amazing book. It's a different take. It's a naturalistic take than the one I'm used to, which is idealism. I know it's more of a panpsychism or panexperientialism. So yeah, I'm hoping to cover this topic and explore with you process philosophy, which is really the ontology of becoming, isn't it? So the world is in constant flux. There's so much that we don't know. We all go through life. We have these experiences, and yeah, we've already discussed some non-ordinary experiences, as you put it, such as my own, to do with lucid dreaming, which resembles a psychedelic experience. It's the one I've depicted with a painting, which is my background. And yeah, you told me that some of my pictures resemble psychedelic experiences. So I don't know if you want to say more about that before we delve into Whiteheadian metaphysics. Yeah, so what do you reckon is going on? I mean, people don't really need drugs to tap into these states, do they? They just have to explore their own minds. Yeah, go for it. Take it away.
I mean, I rather envision extraordinary experiences of the psychological type. You know, not like falling off a mountain, extraordinary experience, but of psychedelics or near-death experiences or lucid dreaming, as you were talking about,
Yeah.
as material flowing in. You know, Jung would put it from the unconscious, and some would say the depth unconscious, and with Whitehead's philosophy, you say more generally from the universe at large, material can flow in when we let down the usual organizing structure of consciousness. So new things can seep through those cracks.
Yeah, I see. Um, actually, I'm friends with Matt Gray, and he hosts another podcast called Cheltenham and UK Philosophers. And very recently, he's interviewed Peter Sherstedt Hughes, and he's involved with the Mind at Large project. And he actually mentioned you to do with Whiteheadian metaphysics. And he also mentioned Olaf Stapledon, and I know he's your favorite science fiction writer. and he authored Star Maker. So they were both talking about that. And that maybe you might even want to go on his podcast. I'm pretty sure the two of you would get on like a house on fire. But
What's the title of his podcast?
it's Cheltenham and UK Philosophers, and his
Hmm,
name is Matt Gray. I can
okay.
link you up with him if you want. Um, but yeah, they were talking about they referenced you, and I was thinking to myself as I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, is it possible that with the Mind at Large project, I don't know how much you are involved with it. Um, it's a project that wishes to spread the idea of a mind at large as far and wide as possible, um, and formulate it in a way that people can accept. So the best way to do it would be to use Whiteheadian metaphysics, which is a more naturalistic one, before people begin to consider other metaphysics, such as, for example, Bernardo Kastrup's analytic idealism or other possibilities, which begin to involve more mystical interpretations. So I'm wondering if Whiteheadian metaphysics is easier to digest. I just had this question in my head, and I'm wondering, is that the basic? Is Whitehead the basic that you can offer people before they can begin to move away from physicalism, which seems to be the prevalent metaphysical worldview at the moment? What's your take?
Well, I am good friends with Peter. I'm on the planning committee for the Mind at Large, so I'm in touch with that closely. Peter's a good friend. I just saw him recently down in Madison, Wisconsin. He was at the USONA Institute, which is doing all kinds of interesting things with extraordinary experience. Um, I don't know. I would think that Whitehead would be an easy step to go into to lead you somewhere else because it's a challenging philosophy if you go into it in any depth. If you say, well, everything's a process. Everything is experiential. That doesn't tell you a lot more than you might already be thinking. So, but when you go into the depths of his metaphysics, it takes a little while to get familiar with it. He it took me about 2 months before I could grasp that when he's talking about moments of experience, actual occasions, which is the basis of his philosophy, that things that it's basically the same as what quantum events are. They're incorporating the past into a new event. And so he generalizes that into, so that's what almost everything that's real is, some kind of creative incorporating of the past into a new feeling tone experiential event. But it took me a couple months to sort of grasp, oh, that's what he's talking about, that I am. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
my neurons are, but also there's another thing that isn't visible, that isn't, very easily detectable, but all of us are directly experiencing all the time. So I do think that Whitehead offers a wonderful alternative to physicalism or physical naturalism by one that's a broader understanding of what's natural, basically. That if naturalism means materialism, then that is I am sure as Peter was outlining, that's may have reached its useful uh, the end of its use as a metaphysical context. And
Yeah.
you need something that's broader, incorporating a wider array of experience and doesn't end up in some of the dead ends, such as the hard problem of consciousness and that materialism produces. And Peter also likes Spinoza. I think he might like Spinoza better than Whitehead, but I'm trying to hold him to Whitehead.
Oh, I see. Yeah, because Spinoza was a pantheist, wasn't he?
He
Yeah, and
was.
and I'm wondering, is Whitehead a panentheist, or because everything is supposed to be within God, and then God has different types of natures or aspects of God. And one of them is a creative principle, isn't it? Or creativity itself. And that seems to be what's happening at the moment. And even I've always thought that we have a creative spark which reflects nature. So the universe is in constant flux. There's a chaotic backdrop. So there's entropy in the universe, and then we represent the force which pushes against that. Um, and we also have this creative principle in our heads, hence our imagination. So it's almost like we mimic the universe at large. The universe is in constant flux, and we can create things in actuality, and so do other life forms, and everything is in constant flux, constant change. And we also, with our imagination, we can dream, we can come up with new concepts. And I'm wondering how congruous is the process philosophy of Whitehead, how congruous is it with Bayes' theorem? And if the brain works like that, so basically we experience past events and we feel them, it means something to us, and then we have some kind of direction and we can make predictions about the future. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Does that reflect Bayes' theorem in a way?
Bayes theory, remind me of what that is
Oh,
exactly.
it's something that I have it right here. So basically, Whitehead's theory of becoming, um, there are changes, probabilities are worked out a posteriori, and the world is not constituted of enduring substances, right? So that goes against Aristotelian logic. So Aristotle said there are substances, but Whitehead says there are only events, right? And it goes against Hegelian truth as well, because it seems like Whitehead carried on the work of Hegel, and Hegel was into German idealism. And Hegel said there is a substance, and movement happens in and through that substance. But Whitehead seems to be saying there are only events, and they are felt, isn't it? So they are felt. So I'm trying to understand this. They are felt, and um, so. And there's a sense in which, in Bayes' theorem, uh, we make predictions about what's going to happen based on what's happened before. So the past informs the future. I think that's the crux of what Bayes' theorem is trying to convey or trying to reflect. So, is there a sense in which we think about the future and we try to predict the future, but we use the past to inform us about the future, but on some subconscious level, our own essence at the same time creates our reality. So, is it more about creating the future rather than predicting it? But we think we are predicting it. There is different levels of experience, aren't there? So Whitehead would say his word when he talks about consciousness, he's talking about human metacognition, isn't it? The more aware level, the immediate experience.
Yeah, he refers to as the crown of experience for consciousness, that which makes up a very small portion of each experiential moment. It's mostly unconscious, and it's an occasional. I like his line that instead of, although I think Descartes might be slightly misrepresented, but rather than a thinker with occasional thoughts, we have thoughts with an occasional thinker, or experiences with an occasional experiencer. So what's it's the flow of experience out of which we emerge, more or less, from moment to moment, depending on what we're doing. If I'm watching TV, there probably isn't much of me really conscious, kind of zoning out. Um, can we go back to panentheism, though?
Yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
covered a lot of ground. You covered a lot of ground there, but I think panentheism is an interesting thing. It's instead of sort of God being everything and we are in God, we're part of God. And William James in The Pluralistic Universe had his last collection of essays was struggling with this because he felt that if we are just parts of a whole in this kind of static relationship, then our being is less real. We're parts. We're sort of absorbed into this whole, and our value and existence becomes less because it's you God's
Right.
everything. So he's struggling with that, and Whitehead's solution is what Charles Hartshorne calls asymmetrical relations. So that, the broadest is that the past is what's happened, the present is what's happening, and the future is events that have not yet happened. But it's manifested in that there is this distinction. So in panentheism versus God is everything, there's a flow between God's moments of experience and the rest of the universe's moments. There's this interweaving. We have our moment of experience. It flows into God. God does whatever God does with that. Whitehead has some thought, some speculations on it. And then that enriched experience flows back into the world. So there's and that's how everything is functioning in that same way. I'm experiencing, have a moment of experience from the past flooding into me. Then, as you were saying, we aren't predicting so much as creatively contributing to the future. My experience then flows into future events. And so it's a little like Indra's web, with everything being reflecting, interconnecting, except it's moving. It's not this
Yeah.
static thing, it's this flow, which I think gives you a lot. I mean, logically, I think it's superior, but I think it gives a better sense of the dynamic quality of the universe.
Yeah. There's something you touched upon in the book um, about God being uh, not the opposite of dictator, basically. So God is gently persuasive, but not coercive. And when I was reading that, it's something that you mentioned in the book, and I was going over the natures of God according to Whitehead. As I was reading that, I remembered an experience I had where I went to the local pharmacy. I cycled there, picked something up for my wife, and then I made my way home. And on my way home, there was a traffic jam, and I was wondering, oh, what's happening here? And as I was cycling, this bumblebee. This is so weird, right? This massive bumblebee bumped into my eye and made me stop on my bicycle. And it's never happened to me before. It's the first time a bumblebee, uh, you know, just bounces off my eye. And when I looked up, I saw two cars causing the traffic jam. And one was parked across the road, and the other one was a white van parked on the other side. And these two men were arguing and calling each other names, and they nearly came to blows. And in that moment, I thought to myself, I could just carry on cycling. I don't know these blokes, but something in me compelled me to intervene. I don't know what, but I thought, no, I have to intervene. I have to intervene. So I got off my bike and I went over and I got them to calm down. I said, just breathe, just relax, both of you. And they were still swearing. And then finally they heard me and they started going, taking deep breaths. I said, just calm down, just forget about this, just drive, just go. And then the one in the van, he went, and the one that was left, before he got in his car, he shook my hand. He goes, "Oh, thank you," and it made me feel really good And then on my way home, uh, I thought to myself, why did I do that? Was it to make myself feel good, or was it because I somehow thought that was the right thing to do? And as I was thinking this, I began to be flooded. As I was cycling, I was flooded with all these possibilities. It was almost like an answer that came to me, almost like I posed a question, and this answer came to me in the form of, if you hadn't intervened, it would be so bad for so many people because it would have been like a ripple effect. Things could have gone so wrong. Someone could have ended up in hospital or the morgue, and then the families of the men would have been affected. I began to get the impression of this nasty ripple effect in experience, and then I was overcome with a sense of relief that I actually did something to stop it right there. And I remembered all of this when I read uh, the portion of your book where you say, God is gently persuasive, but not coercive. And it made so much sense to me because if reality is a sea of experience, then this experience is aware on different levels. And I'm wondering if there's something that transcends even my immediate comprehension of the world. I don't know if this makes sense. If there's something that is beyond me, it's almost mystical. It's beyond me, and somehow in that moment urged me to intervene because it would be so much better for humanity's experience, right? And it came in the form of an insight, and it got my attention through a bumblebee. I know it sounds crazy, but what do you make of that?
Well, as you may remember, God, in Whitehead's scheme, we're feel, God is flowing into us every moment. We're flowing into God. There's this, ongoing interweaving. And so when God enters in, not only does that offer a way of mystical experiences and, uh, of the more well-known kind where people experience God or Godhead or or deep feelings of love in the universe. So we that would mean for Whitehead that these would be real experiences of some of part of the universe. But when you're also doing this, you're feeling you're feeling God's, what do you call it, graded, uh, well, basically what God would like to see happen. The incarnation, so to speak, of the values that God holds and things that God would like to see instantiated in the universe. And so in that moment, you're offered the best possible thing that you could do that moment. And the bee is an interesting aspect of it because are we picturing that God influenced the bee to hit you? Uh, and I mean, that would be the best thing the bee could do in the big picture.
Yeah,
And so I would, I would take that seriously that you were instructed as well. You were offered you were off. Whitehead uses the term allure. You were lured to towards that best possibility, and you picked it up. You fulfilled it, and then
yeah,
when you were then riding on the bike, the way and you saw all the possibilities unfold. Part of God's nature is all potentials and all possibilities. So you're still tuned in a bit, to that flow,
yeah,
and you could extrapolate, from that lure, which contained this is the best possibility, but all these other things could happen if you don't.
yeah,
Which motivated you to accept it. That became conscious, which is we aren't usually conscious of all that going on. That's the unconscious, emerging in. The I had one other thing to add on there.
there is a kind of
Go ahead.
freedom.
I'll ponder that.
Yeah, because something persuaded me to intervene. So it seems to align with what you say in the book, and at the same time, I realized I was also free to carry on. I could have just ignored the whole situation on the road. I could have carried on cycling, and
Well,
I would have been free to do that. But then I didn't realize it at the time. Um, I only realized this in retrospect. You know, it came to my immediate experience, my human consciousness, um, after where I realized if I hadn't intervened, maybe the revelation that it would have been a nasty ripple effect would have weighed on my conscience. Um, that was also one of my realizations, and I'm wondering if um, from Whiteheadian panexperientialism, you can derive a type of morality. Um, what's going on with morality? Where does it come from? Why do we have this sense of right and wrong and a conscience that guides us, and we're free to listen to it or not listen to it? We can just, you know, carry on and ignore that, sense of right and wrong. And I suppose at our peril, because it could come back to haunt us, and it haunts us from the past, doesn't it?
for Precious theology, the ultimate source of that is God. God has this visions of of how things might be and of Whitehead also thinks that that underlying morality is aesthetic beauty, and that
Right.
God is trying to create beauty and adventure and truth, and those happen to be God's primary interests in
Yeah.
creating a universe, and we feel those, and thus the Greeks discovered this, have similar things, not coincidentally. Um, you've also touched on when you're describing that you felt being persuaded to do this, although you didn't have to. You could do other things. That's the avenue of responding to the problem of evil that you find with this. David Griffin developed this in great detail. Charles Hartshorne, that in a universe that has real creativity shared among the creatures, then evil, is a necessary consequence because they can choose to do things that are, not in the best interest of themselves and others. Um, God is luring us towards, towards good, but we have the freedom to do otherwise. And you
Sounds like
know,
the perfect parent.
a friend of mine said, if actually David Griffin writes that, that was actually the most powerful a being could be in a universe with creativity, because a God that just controls everything, that's running everything, that's not really very powerful. It's very easy to control things that don't have any free will. It's like you have these puppets.
Yeah.
That isn't very powerful, really. But if you can be influencing beings with their own creative power towards an end, unpredictable, interesting end, that's real. That has some real influence and some real power.
Yes, it does. There seems to be a teleology implied in all of this, at least from our perspective. It's almost like we are the parts of God that move through this space-time construct. Or maybe it's not a construct. Maybe I wonder if, from our perspective, we build it as we go along. Um, but then I'm wondering if it's already a set thing of infinite possibilities, and these possibilities are actually already manifest somehow. Um, I'm wondering, right? I know there's the principle of creativity, but I'm wondering if this concept of creativity arises in our minds because of our blinkered perspective, um, and if the concept of creativity arises from us traveling through the medium of of God, let's say. God is omnipresent everywhere, and we're traveling through this medium, which is God's terrain, and we experience time as if it's real, but it's only an illusion, and God is really timeless, right? And I know it seems to go against some of the, the narrative that, espoused by Whitehead, but I sometimes wonder if it's another way of experiencing reality, which is not so different from Neoplatonism. Because in Neoplatonism, it's almost like um, we're like an emanation. It's almost like, I've got this picture, right? And I want you to see what you think of it. Imagine there's like an infinite pleroma, right? And when we look at this pleroma with our human eyes, we only see a partial representation. So we would see quantum superpositions, and then we see them actualized. They collapse. We call it a collapse. They collapse into one thing, and when we collapse it, we see the universe, and the universe would be a tiny derivative of this infinite pleroma. So we only see this tiny derivative. So with our human perspective, we actually carve out a finite reality, right? But this infinite pleroma is the mind of God, and we only see a tiny portion of it because we're an emanation. So this would be congruous with, in one sense, with Neoplatonism. So what we see is finite relations and the illusion of separation, but it's all happening within an absolute, let's say. So that's one way of viewing it. But then from Whitehead's perspective, it would say this is how much we can claim to know. From our experience, we experience the passage of time, and that's all we can claim to know. There's a con so I guess what I'm trying to say is in Neoplatonism, time, um, the passage of time is an illusion, and real time would be something static, unchanging, which has to be experienced sequentially only when the one reduces itself to a finite creature, right? A sentient being. But Whitehead would say, no, we can only claim this much. This is our experience. The passage of time is real. The future isn't actualized yet. This is our job. It's our job to actualize it. So I'm wondering if both worldviews are coming at it from different angles. Um, I mean, what do you make of it? Is there something about Neoplatonism that doesn't sit well with you?
I,
There's a lot.
I probably should say I don't know it well enough to make a critique, but I'm going to go ahead anyway and say that it's what I was talking about before, that William James has a whole chapter on the Hegel and the absolute, which he doesn't like. He doesn't like this absolute, although he's using it more general than just Hegel. And in the Neoplatonic sense, that there's this absolute that we are the emanations of, and there's these levels. And you may remember in the book, I say what you need to do is take that great chain of being and turn it on its side. And then you've got a process that God is entering into everything, where we have our moments, we have our reality, and then our reality enters into God. So we are not, God is not everything, as it appears to be in Neoplatonism. God is everything, and we are parts of everything. But God, they're equally primordial is God's experiences, God's being, becoming, and our becoming and being. And creativity is the ultimate metaphysical principle of how we become, how God becomes, and how they interact. It's, the many becoming one. We integrate past reality into a new moment of being. And although it's a little sketchy with Whitehead because he was a little, he kind of came up with this whole God thing at the very end and made
Yeah,
God after saying God cannot be the metaphysical exception uh, he then makes God the metaphysical exception in some ways. So,
yeah,
so Charles Hartshorne says, well, you shouldn't have actually told Whitehead that he shouldn't have done that, and Whitehead sort of agreed. So
yeah.
Whitehead and David Griffin and the people that I have learned from have an alternative way that God is actually a part of that same ongoing process of momentary creation. So yes, yeah, I don't even know quite what does emanation mean for you?
Right, right, right. So w when I think about emanation, so within Neoplatonism, and this is the one that before I came across Whiteheadian metaphysics, I learned about Neoplatonism, and I thought, oh, that could have something in it. So emanation would be, um, for me anyway, how I conceptualize it would be moving away from the one, from the absolute, right? So imagine there is this one, and it's pregnant with infinite potential, but when emanation would be, as humans understand it, would be um, coming to. So the one tries to look at itself, and it can only do that from the illusion of separation. So it begins to blinker itself to become something finite. Um, but in doing so, it no longer observes, um, it can no longer observe or feel the infinite possibilities. So it's almost like a quantum collapse. So we become human, or we become finite creatures, and in doing so, we become aware of a reality that is lacking in information. Is lacking in the infinite information from the absolute, let's say. So if it lacks in information, it suddenly observes a universe that's characterized by um, entropy. So there's decay. There's a tendency for things to become disorderly. There's a tendency for chaos. Um, it perceives a passage of time, and things have a tendency to decay. The universe is entropic because it lacks that information from the absolute. From our perspective, if we're blinkered, we see throughout as we experience the passage of time. So imagine from the absolute, from the one, God is timeless and changeless, as it were. But if it tries to look at itself, it suddenly begins to create all these finite perspectives. And when they look back on itself, they can no longer see the absolute because they're blinkered. If they're finite, then what they see has to reflect that finiteness, has to reflect that lack of information. So if it lacks information, they see an entropic universe, and hence entropy, hence Darwinian evolution, hence the reason why it could be, hypothetically, the reason why we see creatures, finite creatures that struggle to survive, to self-preserve, um, and they're surrounded by a scarcity of natural resources. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like it's a constant struggle. Um, and the more complex you are in this universe, the more you have to, the more blinkered you become, and the more you have to self-preserve, um, which is probably why bacteria are so simple, and they tend to outlive us, to survive for millions of years. But we, as complex machines, how we tend to see ourselves, we're so complex, and we've got more of a challenge to self-preserve. And I wonder if, because of that, we can derive more. experience from this complexity and more experience and more meaning from the fact that we have to constantly struggle. Whereas the experience of, let's say they experience something, the experience of bacteria doesn't require them to struggle that much and they don't derive as much meaning. But there's a trade-off where they don't perceive or feel as much meaning in struggle. Um, they get to self-preserve for a lot longer.
I mean, in
Yeah, I know
Whitehead's
it's a weird
philosophy,
picture, but yeah,
in Whitehead's philosophy, God is trying to create intensity of experience. That's like kind of a primary drive, intensity of feeling. So I think at one point I comment that maybe psychedelics then are like a sacrament, great intensity of experience.
yeah,
Um, so a lot of what you're saying, the strands of what you're saying, I agree with are very interesting, but I don't think the best way to frame it all still is with this Neoplatonic emanation. You know, the story this I think Alan Watts has a book called the Great Game of Hide and Seek or something. And I heard somebody say, well, so the entire thing of the universe is God decides to hide from himself so he can find himself, right? That's the whole story. Whereas with Whitehead, the story is God has infinite possibilities and starts experimenting with instantiating some of them and seeing where it goes. We don't know where it's going to go, but let's see what happens if we start this universe here and have these things and try to create something interesting here. And and then the next one, and then the next one. Have you read Star Maker, Olaf Stapledon's Star Maker?
I haven't, but Matt Gray read it and he's recommended it, and yeah, I'm willing
It,
to get the book actually.
it gives you, I mean, especially towards the end, it gives you a good idea of what of how a science fiction writer, philosopher might describe the meaning of the universe and all universes from a Whiteheadian and Marxist kind of point of view. He's very big on community and higher levels of community. And I'm not going to spoil it for you or for your readers, but I think it's at the very end there's of course a paradox, but when you get to the
Wow.
end of ultimate meaning, there's almost always a paradox because because I think of I'm not sure why, but there is. Um,
Right. I like that. I like paradoxes.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Uh,
I was going to say, there's something that Matt Gray mentioned about the book. I don't know if it's Starmaker, but it comes from Olaf Stapledon, where he says that the universal reality is beautiful, but also tragic, or it's awful. It's awesome,
says
but
the
awful.
universe is a beautiful but a terrible place.
Yeah,
But terrible, you mean sort of terrifying, or as you say, awful in the sense of being full of awe, which is often terrifying.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I do.
It's
Some
funny that
people.
because my last psychedelic experience on magic mushrooms um, gave me a sense with this other person that I'm not going to name, but gave me a sense of we were suddenly looking around and saying, "Wow, look at the world and reality. It's so beautiful, but also so tragic." And
Mhm.
yeah, it just when I read about Star Maker in your book and what Olaf Stapledon says about reality, it reminded me of that psychedelic experience because it gave me that sense of something moving, like this process of becoming and it's so beautiful, but at the same time, from our perspective, we're so lost and it feels so tragic and there's so much going on.
At the end of one of the sections of Whitehead's Adventures of Ideas, he waxes poetic and says something like the how does something like the beautiful hope of spring and the tragic harvest of winter. And he's, that he said at one point he says the ultimate metaphysical evil is perpetual perishing. And I was at a conference once, and my mother was with me, and she was asking me what that means. I was telling her about it. She goes, what does that mean? And so I asked my mentor to introduce me to White. He said, loss.
Yeah.
Because we're in constant, change, the past, Whitehead puts it, the past fades. And so, everything we do, everything we create, is, dust in the wind, as
Yeah.
Kansas,
Yeah.
that whole thing, which is one of the reasons Whitehead, I think one of the more emotional reasons Whitehead developed a theory of God is that one of the functions is God preserves all accomplished fact.
Right.
Everything that's happened is remembered and kept in God's being. And so ultimately there's no objective loss. There's subjective loss for us, but but God, he's sort of his ultimate redemption of well, the universe and of our lives is this preservation, loving preservation, I think Whitehead puts it.
Oh, I see. I'll tell you something. Have you seen a film called The Long Walk by Stephen King?
I have not. I've heard of it.
I really recommend it because I only watched it recently anyway, but it's um it's redolent of the concept of perpetual perishing, and it's really tragic. It's a horror. And I'm not going to ruin it for you. I'm not going to give away the twist. There's a twist at the end as well. But there's so much in it, and it emphasizes morality, experience, life. And one of the characters in the movie says something very Whiteheadian, because amidst the chaos and the perpetual perishing on their journey, one of the characters turns around and says, "But it's tragic, but look around you. Look at the beauty of the trees and the sun and the birds. Um, it's the present moments that matter. It's this moment right now that matters." And that really stayed with me. It's a very profound film. I really recommend that you watch it because it speaks to what you've just said right now. And yeah, it portrays how tragic life can be, but at the same time, it gives you a hint at what matters and what it's all for. And there's so much meaning packed into that film. And I think it's a film for philosophers, that's for sure. For philosophers, it mentions philosophy, it mentions religion, it mentions experience itself. Yeah, I think Whiteheadians out there would definitely enjoy it. I think you would enjoy it, yeah.
That was one of the great things psychedelics did for me was make me aware of being here now, as Ram Dass, his book says. Not that I'm always able to do it, I'm doing other stuff, but that's a possibility, and how rich being how things unfold in a very different way when you're just fully present. And the one of my favorite, I think one of the brilliant things that John Cobb, who's another brilliant Whiteheadian interpreter,
That's right, yeah. You
uh,
mentioned
he,
him.
he has a book called Beyond Dialogue, which is his Whiteheadian encounter with Buddhism, which he thinks can, mutually inform each other. And what Whitehead also says at some point that his philosophy is closer to some strains of Asiatic thought than to Western thought, and
Yeah.
probably with Buddhism in mind. But one of the things where he thinks Whitehead can help Buddhism is, or at least our understanding of Buddhism, is that I think often the idea is presented that the present moment is all there is. This is it. And while in one sense that's true, but the present moment is created out is the past now and the future anticipated. So, and if we're just in the now, appreciate how beautiful it is, we can destroy the world because we're not thinking about the future. So
Yeah.
having the past as part of this now and the future anticipation of it as part of the now of the now, all the reality in the now, I think gives us a better a better way of understanding our experience, but of dealing with our problems and issues that are facing us.
Yeah, definitely. It's it's a terrifying journey, really, that we're on. And yeah, like you said, it's almost like the present is the past updated somehow. And from our perspective, we can still direct it and shape it to create the future. So
Mhm.
we're God's agents in a way, aren't we? And at the same time, we are um, God's limbs, as it were. I don't know if that's a fitting analogy, but it seems like um, we we are God in terms of His essence. Is that fair to say? Like the essence of God is what we are at the same time, but we're just different expressions. Um,
Well, I would say we're informed by God's essence.
Informed, right?
Um, one of the interesting things with Whitehead is that he emphasizes creativity and novelty, but he also emphasizes the importance of repetition. That each moment is repeating the past, and then more or less. But if atoms, didn't do repetition really well, like for billions of years, we wouldn't have the underlying physical matrix that
That's right.
has allowed the creation of everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I sometimes wonder if it's a bit like music, like God through us. We're like instruments, God's instruments, and it's constantly creating music, and it can't be too um, chaotic or unpredictable. Otherwise, it's just cacophony. So that you can't derive much meaning from cacophony, other than say, well, that's what chaos or disorder looks like. But if you begin to include repetition and you can't repeat something, the same thing, the same notes forever. Otherwise, it's just going to be boring. So I wonder if there's a balance to be struck there between chaos and order. So you can't have too much order. Otherwise, it's just repetition and it makes it monotonous. And you also can't have too much chaos. Otherwise, it's just unpredictable. And the noise itself becomes predictable. Oh, it's just going to be more noise and not much meaning. So the consciousness would live between the two, and the
Uh,
meaning and the concrescence perhaps would live between, you know, the edge between order and chaos. What do you think?
well, Whitehead says something very, very close to that about civilization, that it requires order and novelty. That too much order and it stagnates, too much novelty and it disintegrates. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, I think, but the thing with music, I think that's probably the best analogy there is for Whitehead's philosophy, because I said, it's an aesthetic with harmony, and it's also vibrational. This repetition, moment to moments, are vibratory, emotional bursts, as it were. So to picture this, I mean, so the universe is this musical, vibrational thing, creating aesthetic harmonies and more intensities.
yeah.
Yeah,
Cosmic
I think that's
Symphony.
a fabulous metaphor for it.
Yeah, it just came to me because it seems like it's so right, and music is so tied to feeling as well. So it seems to me
Yeah,
like it's a perfect analogy, you know. Um, but yeah, we
I mean,
should.
you literally feel the notes,
Yeah,
Also, it's I mean, in a number of ways, and vibrates with us, and
that's right. Um, I mean, a lot of people are going to say when they watch this, they're probably going to be thinking, Is there a, so there's no substance, there's no substrate to this eventuality? I mean, what's the they're going to be wondering what's the essence? And when, especially the more materialistically inclined, they're going to say, well, if there's no materiality, what's the essence? I mean, what they're going to be saying, what is prehension? And I know prehension is a word that Whitehead came up with. Um, it's
Yeah.
like a neologism because in your book you mentioned that he defended the use of neologisms to describe reality because we lack the vocabulary to describe what surrounds us, which is infinite. And if we have a limited vocabulary, and if we think that we can use that limited vocabulary to describe reality, then we're committing the fallacy of the complete dictionary, isn't it? S-
Perfect dictionary. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, his thing was if you have a new idea, a metaphysical concept, and you use an old term for it, then people are going to think it's going to think of the old term. But if you use a completely new thing, then people are going to think you're being obtruse or difficult. So with prehension, it's prehensive means grasping. Like a monkey's tail is a prehensive
yeah,
thing. So uses a word that is part of the language, but yet using it in a new ways to hopefully sort of go between those two issue problems. But people still find that thinks he's being difficult and using
yeah,
neologism anyway. But he was aware of the problem and tried to deal with it. But your question of where's the beef, as it were,
yeah,
where's the stuff?
yeah.
Well,
Where's the stuff?
I mean, none of it with materialism, what is the stuff? I mean, now with quantum, everyone gets all excited that quantum reality means that almost everything is space, and even what's inside, the atoms is really just these events. So there really isn't stuff in materialism anymore. There's probability fields and uh, um, so that doesn't work for science and for for everyday life. I mean, here's this real desk, but it's me experience. It's this thing that's appeared in my experience. So
Yeah,
what's so this stuff is here, but it's in my experience. So that's it's part of my experience, but it's it's sort of a secondary aspect of the primary reality of experiential moments. I think that's how our lives are, isn't it? That's our direct experience of life.
yeah. I mean, it's undeniable that there is experience. Um, as far as we can tell, as far as we feel, that in this moment right now, there is um, a subject that experiences things, and that's the
Now
reality.
we have to correct that, of course, from what I said with Descartes. We have experiences that occasionally have a subject. When we start thinking about ourselves, oh yeah, I'm and but often we're just having these experiences. When you're driving along, you're not necessarily thinking, no, I'm driving, now I'm turning you're just flowing along with it. But then a car cuts you off and you go, God damn, why did you do that to me? I'm gonna, so we have a subjects emerging or an I emerging out of this flow of experience. There's subjective moments, but there's not a subject having those moments for Whitehead.
For Whitehead, right. So let me try and understand this. Um, the first time I went to the cinema to watch The Matrix, right, and I was immediately uh, mesmerized by the film as it was happening. It's the brain in a vat scenario in a science fiction movie, and as I was watching it, I was so engrossed in it, I completely forgot myself. So as the movie was happening and I was enjoying it, there was no thought of I or me, I'm watching the movie. It was just the events happening and they're just happening. And I'm engrossed. I think that's the best word, really. I'm engrossed in the movie, and I completely forgot myself. And then when it finished, I was suddenly back to being me. So the sense of self was suddenly augmented. I'm here at the cinema, movie's finished, and I thought to myself, "Oh, that's weird. There's something to this self concept. It's not as apparent all the time. It tends to fluctuate. Sometimes it's really obvious, And I began to think if I go outside and some stranger starts on me, if some stranger just glares at me and walks in my direction and it looks like he's going to attack me, then my sense of self is going to become really heightened. I'm going to be on maybe survival mode. I'm going to be thinking all sorts of things. Is this person going to attack me, kill me? I'm going to have to defend myself. What's going to happen to me? All of a sudden, it matters what happens to me. But contrast that to the experience of just watching The Matrix, and I'm enjoying the film so much, I'm not even thinking about myself. It's just the events of the movie. And then I remember that experience. So there's a sense in which, even though the I fluctuates, it comes and goes, the experience remains. So it's almost like that level of consciousness doesn't really go away. Is there a sense in which Whitehead can accommodate two meanings for the word self? One that is more related to ego and thinking about oneself, and the other one related to an experience that surely must be happening to someone, or the experience itself is alive, is its own subject. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And I think that's the basic argument that idealists make, that, consciousness, however you want to define it, doesn't have to be human level consciousness. It could just be phenomenal consciousness is really the base of reality. I mean, what do you make of that? Where do
well, I mean,
idealists go wrong?
Whitehead, some of us Whiteheadians prefer the term experience because, as I said before, we, a lot of experience we assume is unconscious. What's flowing in from the neurons, we don't experience our neurons, but we must be being influenced by them. I think that's a fairly safe bet. Or our bodies, we feel little things of our bodies, but we're obviously having some kind of deep interaction with them that's keeping us breathing, and so the to say it's for me to say something is conscious, I think of I'm aware, I'm here, I'm aware.
Immediate
It's
experience.
and so as I said, Whitehead calls consciousness the crown of experience. So it's to say something is, I think it confuses materialists to say that everything is consciousness because you say, well, is this rock conscious? I don't think it is. Is this desk conscious? I don't
Yeah.
think it is. But if you say, well, the molecules and atoms that are making up these things have some kind of activity which resembles some kind of primitive integration of past events. In that sense, it's a primitive sentience, and which cells have more complex sentience. Then we get to human animal. The most ridiculous thing is to think animals don't have experience. Anybody that has a pet knows animals have
Yeah,
experience,
of
right?
course, yeah.
But that's ruled out because it's a materialistic assumption that I don't. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. But that's was ruled out for a long time. They did vivisection on was it back in the 18th century on animals, and the animals would be crying and screaming, and isn't it interesting how these machines make noise that almost sounds like they're suffering? That's how
Yeah,
dramatic
yeah.
but nothing I was saying is, would be news to Buddhists. They, I mean, they put the center on experience with a subject that lacks ultimate reality. But just one other thing, Whitehead has what is called personally ordered society. So it's like an atom has a series of events, one event after another. and it creates this society, an extended moment. And it sees the human psyche in those terms, what Whitehead does, in that and at any moment, the human psyche is how does he put it? I can't, I wish I could call this phrase, but it's a particularly thorough summing up of the past series. So,
Summing up,
in this
yeah.
moment, I have this feeling it's me, which is this, sort of this synthesis of the essence of all these past moments creates this feeling of me. So this feeling of me is real in that sense, but it's not like there's something besides that,
Yeah.
this thing going forward. And so it has a reality, and at times there's also the the reflective consciousness that I think about and have create more of a traditional I. But there's always this, except in perhaps in amnesia or certain cases of I had a movie experience too. When I was 19, I took some kind of powder that a friend had. I think it might have been THC, and went to see I went to see the movie The Frogs, which is this horror movie about the reptiles getting revenge on humans in
Oh God.
this southern plantation in a swamp. It's pretty horrifying. And it came out of the theater. Apparently, it came out of the theater. I was riding my bike around town, and so they thought, "What the hell happened? What was that about?" I mean,
Yeah.
I had got completely into that non-identity through that movie, and for a while afterwards. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's an interesting experience, isn't it? And that happens on psychedelics also. I find quite often. There's just you're sort of in pure experience for a while, and then
Yeah.
it's like, what time is it? It must be like three days later. It's like 10 minutes later because the immersion was so deep.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I remember one of the psychedelic trips that you describe in the book. Um, you were looking at a clock and the hand wasn't moving at one point. It makes me think how tied is that experience to special relativity, time dilation, and everything else, and how tied is that to experience itself? It has so much in your book that provides food for thought, really. And I'm wondering, so Whitehead is really painting a panpsychist picture, isn't he? But not the physicalist type. So it's almost like a panpsychism, but remove the physical substrate, where it's just experience, and at the base, this experience, um, relative to human consciousness, is unconscious, but it's a creative process, and it feels so. In a sense, because it feels relative to other things, it has its own limited consciousness in a way. It's a very would you say it's a primordial type of awareness, let's say, because in order to feel something, you have to be aware of the feeling, and the feeling provides impetus for motion,
I
right?
think I think sentience might even be better because we don't have any associations of necessary of conscious experience with that. And yeah, I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
what
It
Whitehead
could be a
has
difference in semantics, but yeah, it's
Whitehead
sentience.
What is a wonderful phrase of the past, uh, an emotional throb thrusting itself into the past, into the future. So it's this pulling together, this pulling together of influences from the past, and then having that flow forward. And
Like fireworks.
but one of the reasons I don't like just everything as consciousness is that it feels like there's no stuff. There's
Right,
this. Whereas if you think of there's this, deep, intense, integrative,
right.
emotional
Yeah.
thing, then it feels like there's something's there, that you can think
I,
might,
I think I think the argument from idealism, um, so basically the idealist will use his own reasoning that you begin from epistemology. Before you can make any claims as to the ontology of reality, you begin from epistemology. How much can you truly claim to know with 100% certainty? Well, I'm conscious right now. Uh, Consciousness can't be an illusion. It's real. It's a brute fact of reality. So you can't be mistaken about being conscious, or you can't be mistaken of thinking or thinking that you're thinking. So the idealist would begin with that and extrapolate from that to and then it would make obviously a leap of faith to say that other minds, according to my screen of perception, I see representations of other minds. So when I see a person, that's a partial representation of a human mind. So, and it, according to my screen of perception, there's space between me and that person. So it's apart from me, but all within this mind at large, or this field of consciousness, I should say, right? Which which we all share. Um, and the idealist would say. Um, the particles, the molecules, the objects, uh, even though they have applicability, when we think of them as objects, as made of substances that have standalone existence, um, ultimately it's just consciousness, the field of consciousness, let's say, dreaming, um, dreaming up reality. So to them, the universe would be a kind of dream uh, similar to the personal dreams that we have when we go to bed in our sleep. So I suppose the strongest argument an idealist could make to defend the notion that it's literally all mind, or there is only ultimately consciousness, would be that consciousness um, is the substrate like clay, let's say, and the objects we see are the pots and the plates that you can make out of clay. But if you take a step back, those are illusions, and there is only one substance. It's a monism. There is only one substance, which is clay, which would be mind. And they would say um, the experience of physicality can be had in a dream. So you could be having a dream. You could be sleeping and having a REM type of dream that's really vivid, and you're having an experience of operating a machine. You're an engineer, and you're operating this machine, and you believe that you're at work, and you experience it's so the dream is so vivid. You experience all the vivid sensations. You experience tactility, the noise the machine makes. You can see it vividly, and only to wake up and suddenly realize, oh, that was just completely an illusion. And likewise, you could be a scientist in a vivid dream. You're not lucid. You could be looking through a microscope. You could be seeing molecules and particles and whatnot, only to wake up and realize, oh, that was just an illusion. So the idealist would make the extrapolation to the rest of the universe to say that uh, our experience, which we share, would be another type of dream, a shared dream, let's say, and it goes by the same principle where observed phenomena doesn't last. It has its own, objects have their own lifespan. When we see objects perish in dreams, in nightly dreams, when we're awake, waking life is another type of dream where objects take longer to perish, take longer to disappear, because it operates under a different, you know, a different rule, a temporal rule, the atomic decay, what we call atomic decay, is the process of the dream object of life, let's say, disappearing. What do you think of that? I mean, that would be, I'm basically steel manning the idealist position, against the Whiteheadian picture,
I
which I
just
could see is also
it'd
equally
be
valid.
let me mention a dream I once had. I was taking a phenomenology course, and the professor said, "Well, the way you can distinguish a dream from reality is that in reality, you're awake. You can tell you're awake. And so I was thinking about that. I was thinking, yeah, that it really makes sense. I know I'm awake, and then I woke up. I've been in a dream thinking that I know this is reality. So things get very funny around
That's a cruel
dreams
trick.
and psychedelics and hallucinate. But I think two things. One, I agree with Whitehead that when you're building a picture of reality, you take all the evidence that's available, which includes evidence from science, includes evidence from, he puts it, evidence waking, sleeping, all evidence, and put it together to create a picture. You don't necessarily start with one tiny piece and try to extrapolate from that. But
Yeah.
secondly, I think there's an error in that approach, and that Heidegger's being in the world. We don't I don't find myself here in my consciousness and then discover a world. I'm here with people in a world. That's the given. The given isn't my thought. So, I mean, you can start there, but then you already started with the idea of that consciousness is primary, is what is. But if you start with what seems to be my experience, I'm in a world of people and objects, and part of which is my awareness of it, but it's also that these things that are creating my awareness of it. So I think you start in a world, and you don't have to figure out how to get to a world from inside my brain. I mean, even neuroreductive explanations, you know, the brain, the brain, that's going from a different direction, but that always baffles me because I have a theory about something that I have seen with my experience, and we could call it a brain. And now we're saying the brain is what's this thing that's in my experience is what's explaining my experience, right? So
Yeah.
or complete to say completely anyway, completely explains my experience
Yeah.
seems like a paradox again, right?
Yeah. I'll tell you something. You mentioned, is it
But by the way,
David?
I thought you did a really good summary of idealism there. Thank you.
No worries, no worries. I mean, I'm only trying to figure out what's going on here and, you know, trying to find criticisms which pertain to panpsychism and also idealism. I guess we're just trying to be less wrong, really. Let's put it that way. And I don't know how you feel, but I feel like I should bring you back for another conversation, and maybe we can even invite Philip Clayton because I've spoken to him about Heidegger and Professor Richard Oxenberg as well. We've spoken about briefly about these topics. We've covered classical theism as well, and
Mm.
um, and how God is Satchidananda from Oxenberg's perspective mainly, and it's the being. Um, what God is existence itself, or something like that. It's the being, and it's yeah. There are so many
Well,
things that we could cover really, but yeah, there's something about classical theism which seems to fit in with uh, Whitehead's conception of God, but they're not completely. I don't think. I'm not sure. Maybe that's something that we could all get together and discuss. But yeah, you mentioned David Griffin, and is he the guy, if memory serves me correctly, is he the guy that uh, posited that maybe we can derive some kind of afterlife from Whiteheadian metaphysics, or have I got this wrong?
well, it's a wonderful book called um, Philosophy or Parapsychology, Philosophy, and Spirituality, where he's looking at evidence for the possibility of existence after death. And what he uses the Whitehead, his analysis of the evidence is fascinating in itself because he's one of the most thorough researchers that I've ever encountered. But early on, he develops, for there to be existence after death, kind of evidence we want to look for would be things where people are, are doing things out of their body. So, there's astral projection, there's reincarnation. There's these things that indicate that people have somehow been, survived their body. But he starts out by saying how Whitehead's philosophy might make that idea, metaphysically, make it a metaphysical possibility. Because if you were to say, well, the mind is a product of the brain, the body dies, that's it. So you need to address that first. So yes, he uses Whitehead's philosophy to address the philosophical issues and then examines the empirical evidence to see what evidence there is for people, being able to exist outside of the body.
Yeah, because I see I've got like a
He also wrote about 30, 40 other books. So he's
I bet.
he's one
Yeah,
of those guys,
yeah, yeah. I definitely want to look into him. Um because I've been researching not so much around now, but maybe since 2023 I began to look into near-death experiences because and that's when I really doubted materialism and I began to embrace idealism and looking into panpsychism. And I began to look into near-death experiences because of an experience I had when I was at university, when I was a materialist with doubts. And basically, I was experimenting with drugs at the time and drinking heavily. And I'd gone on a bender and I hadn't slept properly, hadn't eaten properly. Woke up one morning, went straight to the uni bar, and then I was talking to my friends, decided to use the loo. So took a look at the bar, the people there, you know, and then went to the loo and I collapsed in front of the urinals and I had an experience, right? And and it's funny because at first I found myself in this realm, this white realm surrounded by white mist, and it felt like I was on fluffy clouds. I know it's funny, it sounds like heaven. And I was so happy and no worries whatsoever, right? But I also didn't have immediate memory. And it was only when I said, "Oh, what's happened?" that I suddenly remembered, "Oh, I think I fainted in front of the urinals." And when
Hmm.
I thought this, I suddenly found myself back in the bar, right, the pub. Not, I wasn't uh, in the loo. I wasn't observing my body. I was just back in the pub, and I was floating above the heads of people. And as I floated above the heads of people, I wasn't thinking of myself again. It was almost like just a pure awareness moving through space. And if it wasn't like I was flowing through space, it was almost like I was mouse trailing, like moving gradually through space. And today I
Hmm.
think, is it because the guy who was trying to revive me in the loo was slapping my face and maybe that's what disturbed the movement? I don't know. That's a theory. But I was observing the heads of people and as they interacted and I heard their voices and they were talking, I almost began to somehow feel their emotions, like they were trying to impress one another in the pub.
Hmm.
And then suddenly, and I felt free. I was enjoying the experience, and suddenly I was back in the body. So the perspective was in my body. I was laying on this guy's lap, and he was slapping me and splashing me with water and saying, "Oh, come on, wake up, wake up, wake up." And I was like, "Oh, I'm all right, I'm all right." And I was a bit annoyed. And when he took me back in the pub, And my friends came over. Oh, what happened? And the guy said, "Oh, you should have seen him. He looked, when I found him, he looked dead." That's what he said. He looked so pale. He looked dead. Right. I didn't know what was going on. And I didn't tell anyone about my experience. But when I looked around the pub, I thought it looks as though I've been here and I saw those people, the very same people, but from above. But then I thought to myself, is it because on my way to the loo, I was taking in um, the experience of the people on a subconscious level, and somehow it reconstructed everything, but from a different perspective, from near the ceiling. So I was wrestling with this, and I think it's the first time when I seriously doubted the materialistic worldview. I began to think, well, is it possible that maybe I was floating above their heads? Because it sounded unbelievable to me that somehow I reconstructed everything from a subconscious reservoir, and it was very detailed. Yeah, so I wrestled with that. So it seemed to me like there were two ways of interpreting that experience, and one of them all of a sudden began to be more compelling because it seemed that my waking experience, once I recovered, appeared to confirm what was experienced in that state, in that non-ordinary state. And since then, when I began to transition, when I had my paradigm shift, let's say, and I began to see, well, materialism doesn't work. I looked back on that experience and I thought, right, it wasn't an NDE, even though some people online said, "Oh, it was an NDE," and but someone said to me, "No, it's probably you probably experienced that because you had vasovagal syncope. You hadn't eaten, you'd taken a lot of drugs, you were feeling run down, and that's probably why that happens." But this person said, "I can't really tell you exactly what the experience was." But the experience didn't tell me anything about the universe, about the secrets of the universe. I saw no spirit guides. I didn't see a tunnel with light at the end. I saw none of those things. But it seemed to me like it was a trauma-based out-of-body experience, let's say, and an
That sounds right.
experience. So not necessarily a veridical OBE, but in terms of experience, that's what it felt like, what it looked like. So, um,
Sounds like a vertical out of body experience to me.
yeah, yeah. So you see what I'm saying? So I'm wondering if from Whiteheadian metaphysics you can exist in that state after what we call the physical body has perished. So there's no substance. The body is just an eventuality. It comes together, it goes. And I'm wondering if what was gathered from that body, which signified the immediate experience, the immediate human experience, I'm wondering if that lingers for longer after the body is collapsed under Whiteheadian metaphysics, and if that makes it possible for what David Griffin is saying. And I've noticed a lot of these NDEs seem to confirm things. It seems like people near near death um, begin to access information that they couldn't possibly know through conventional means. It's almost like, and I'm wondering how much that relates to Aldous Huxley's filtration theory of consciousness. If when the brain is compromised severely, or whatever mechanism the brain represents, even if it's just prehensions, if it's compromised, if that releases something which begins to access more information, um, it's less impaired. Egoic barriers begin to fall away. So I'm wondering if from NDEs we can begin to derive some kind of metaphysical picture about reality, which includes an afterlife. And maybe David Griffin is on his way to uncover that, or what do you think?
Well,
It's a
well,
lot.
he's very much on his way since he died a while back. So he now knows better.
Oh, so he now knows. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But he
yeah.
but yeah, I mean that's what he's developing. He's basically very simply Whitehead's metaphysics, he thinks, and I would agree, allows for the possibility of continued experiential moments after dissolution of the human body. Because the moment we have these moments of experience that are in deep interaction with all of the bodily processes and the world, but they're not solely dependent on that. So theoretically, I think Whitehead says that, it's a possibility, but not a necessity in his system. So but yeah, I mean, so, I had a conference where we had Ken Ring, who was one of the first near-death experience researchers, and this, I mean, fascinating accounts. And um, I was, did Peter mention the one of our other Mind at Large project people, Alex Gomez Marin or
Oh, yeah,
Marin?
yeah. I've heard of him. Yeah,
He had a near-death experience, and he's very scientific minded, and his near-death experience, completely, you know,
yeah.
changed his mind. And then, it turned out that the scientific community wasn't delighted with him,
Oh,
talking about this stuff,
I can
of
imagine.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, there's I think a neurosurgeon here in the States who had I can't think of his book, but it was something like 7 Days in Heaven. He had some kind of event where he's essentially brain dead for like 7 days,
Oh,
but
is
then
that
can't,
the? Is it Alexander Ebenezer or something like that? I think I've heard of him.
I,
Yeah.
I went to a talk of his, I read his book. We were having a conference that I thought I wanted to invite him to, but he, was too busy with his book tour or whatever. But he was so, I mean, I don't know if it's funny or sad, but he was so convinced that because he was a neurosurgeon and had this experience, that doctors and scientists would believe him because he was, and there have been a lot of people who've had these ideas, that one person testifying this really true, no matter what their credentials are, is not going to change everything. Although certain people, I probably Peter mentioned this, there's some very strong, how should I put it, very influential philosophers who are moving into idealist or panpsychist positions, and
Yeah.
that's shaking things up in the world of philosophy, to suddenly have this person that you're counting on to be a materialist, suddenly isn't. Yeah, and apparently it's making people think twice. Also,
Yeah.
I think it also I think gives you permission. You know,
Yes, it
it,
does.
it
Yeah.
it's no longer the dogma, that you're going to be,
Yeah.
excommunicated from the scientific community for saying something.
Yeah. You must have seen a radical change from when you first took your uh, behaviorist class. I think you mentioned it in the book. You took a class on behaviorism, and we've come a long way from that now, because now it's
Yeah,
permissible to ask the question, well, is consciousness fundamental? I mean, I'd imagine if you had asked something like that in the 50s or 60s or or even 70s, don't even have to go that far back, you would have been met with ridicule, I'd imagine.
yeah.
You weren't,
Well,
I suppose you weren't allowed. It was a taboo subject, wasn't it? Consciousness or as a fundamental or something that could be studied.
the funny thing was, in that class, I found it kind of interesting. It was my first class in psychology. I thought I didn't think this was the way to go, but I thought it's kind of interesting. This isn't completely, and that B.F. Skinner really had this idea. He's trying to free human beings because we're really just these behavior controls. So if we control behavior in a way, we're freeing them from uncoordinated, control of their behavior. We'll fix it, we'll make it. And so, I mean, I think he was is oddly enough sort of idealistic, but I think way off, was took took materialism to the final extreme in psychology, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
It hasn't panned. It has its purposes, but it's not everything. It becomes everything. That's the problem. One approach becomes the only approach, and then that's when things go awry.
Yeah. I'm wondering how did behaviorism ever take off? Because um, surely that's behavior isn't the only indication that someone's having an experience, a conscious experience. But I mean, weren't they aware of locked-in syndrome or anything like that?
I, I mean, this is a pure guess on my part, but I would think that probably some dissatisfaction with psychoanalytic theory that, it's not scientific and, we need to find something scientific. And if it's going to be scientific in those periods, it was going to be materialistic. So behaviorism really came up as a, observable, a way of observing things and fitting the experimental method. And so I imagine that those things just it was a confluence of those things coming together.
Yeah,
Just a guess, though.
yeah. Actually, you've just
You know,
reminded
I,
me. Yeah, I was going to say you've so in process philosophy you have um the process includes interdependence, influence, and confluence, isn't it? Is that are those the things that you need for concrescence to take place? It's something that I was willing to ask you. So there's interdependence, and then there's if there's interdependence, things depend on other things. What are these things? Are they just, is it just different events that come together? Yeah, I was willing to ask you about the coex system as well, which is similar to Jung's complexes, isn't it?
yes, yes,
That
very,
that
very.
touches
I
on
mean,
psychology.
pretty much. I mean, pretty much the same, although they may be even more inclusive of a wider range of psychological phenomena than a complex. It can be an entire personality structure can be caught up in
Yeah,
a in
yeah,
a
yeah. Because
it has the term governing system also that you're sort of under the sway of this particular complex, which
yeah,
you
so
often.
so the complex can influence you the way you feel about the present and which direction you're going to take into the future, right? So is there a sense? I think it was what's his name? Not Olaf. Oh, it's Stanislav Grof, right? Did Was he the one who came up with the concept that what happens to you at birth can influence you throughout the rest of your life? Like the trauma that you experience from being born can somehow influence your
Well,
behavior and how you feel.
Otto Rank, one of Freud's disciples, kind of came up with the idea. He had a book called The Birth, something about the birth trauma.
Yeah,
But Stan Grof developed that in great detail because he found that when he was running psychedelic sessions for people, you could trace back a lot of the sort of the things that manifested eventually seemed to show a phenomenology that were reminiscent of the stages of birth. Floating in this paradise, and everything's beatific, and then suddenly there's this you're being strangled and you had the no exits phase, and then there's this crushing force, and so a lot of the phenomenology of that could easily arise out of the birth process seem to be connected to a whole array of later psychological development.
yeah. That's very interesting,
She's
actually.
got basic perinatal matrices, one, two, three, and four. One being in the womb, two, the birth process had started, but the cervix hasn't opened. So, you're trying to get out, but there's nowhere, you can't go
Yeah,
anywhere. And
yeah,
then going through the birth canal is three. And then, fourth is kind of this archetypal liberation and freedom. And
right. Yeah. And hence the reason why people develop these phobias because they somehow remind them on a subconscious level about the experience they've had before. And yeah, the archetypal experience behind that, this archetype can manifest itself in several traumatic ways. It has many forms of expression, doesn't it? It could be
yeah,
drowning, or it could be, it could be struggling to come to the surface of something. It's the same feeling in a way, but expressed in different ways, isn't it?
yeah. People would have psychedelic experiences where they remember that, when they're 12 years old, they almost drowned. And then when they were, four, they choked on something and nearly suffocated.
Yeah,
And then, then they go back to the birth process, and then they would have memories of past lives where they were hung. So there's it's a whole sequence of
yeah,
similar feeling tone and different ex development, different ways of experience of imagining that, as it were.
yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you, I don't want to keep you for too long. I mean, just let me know when you want to go. But I was going to say, um, Stanislav Grof, did he come up with a transpersonal unconscious realm which goes beyond Jung's collective? It's Stanislav Grof, isn't it? And
Yep, yep. He really combined a lot of the psychoanalysts by he uses uh, Reich's work with body armor as part of the holotropic therapy, holotropic breathwork therapy. And then he has Ronk with the birth trauma, then Jung with sort of the archetypal dimensions. And then he really expands beyond into even deeper transpersonal mystical experiences and, well, extraterrestrial experiences. I guess these could theoretically fall under Jung's categories, but um, I would say it's even a sort of going a little beyond Jung, really.
yeah, he came up with holotropic breathwork, didn't he? So you,
Yep,
you move towards the whole.
He and his wife Christina developed that when they were at Esalen. After he was doing psychedelic research in the States after having kind of snuck out of Czechoslovakia, and
Yeah,
then they shut down all psychedelic research. So they had the last operating place, and they shut that down. So he went to Esalen and developed holotropic breath work and was there for quite a while. At a really interesting time because there are all these people coming and going that you not Huxley, I don't think, but Fritz Per anyway, all kinds you can
Fritz
imagine
Perl,
in the
yeah, yeah,
60s and 70s, who's hanging out at Esalen. So it was a fascinating time. You know, we got
Gestalt
into the
theory, isn't
Darwin
it? Fritz Perl. It's the
Gestalt, yeah,
Gestalt, yeah, yeah.
Gestalt therapy, yeah. I did a few training weekends in that. It's pretty interesting, really. Um,
Wow.
but Stan told a story that the first, he went in and had a psychedelic. They'd sent Sandoz had sent the Czechoslovakian Institute samples of LSD to see what they think of it. And so they were starting to experiment with it they thought it could imitate schizophrenic states. So they were running session. He was a psychiatrist in training, so he went in and he's lying there on the LSD, and they took the strobe light and started flashing the strobe light, right?
Wow.
Which really sent him out. But he said, driving there, he'd be like, driving to work, and it's really, and he said afterwards, he was like, had one finger on the steering wheel, you know.
Oh my
So
God.
it's like, complete shift of, your world, how you're experiencing the world, from
Yeah,
being this frustrating, irritating place to, hey, everything's easy now.
yeah, yeah. In a way, there's a kind of distortion that comes with psychedelics. And I suppose it's probably better to focus inwards rather than focus on the external world because then there's a clash between what's going on internally with what's already set around you, isn't there? And then you can get superpositions, I suppose.
Well, I do think you want, I, I think I wish I'd had more experiences with a guide and somebody, having me stay inside and process it. But I do think there's also value. And, like, I remember walking outside after psychedelics, when I'm coming down and just, seeing that beauty you were talking about. So overwhelming, things are so overwhelmingly beautiful and sacred, So I
Yeah,
think there's value to that also. But I do think the primary thing is hopefully more of an internal. There's another great story that Rick Tarnas tells about Stan. Rick was working at Esalen in the guard station while, so he had a job while he was doing his dissertation. And like 3 in the morning, this woman came running down the driveway naked, and and he got her blanket, and her boyfriend was in the back of their van, and he had a knife,
oh
and
no.
he was tripping, and was having a bad
Oh
trip. And
yeah.
Rick, Rick didn't quite know it, so he got Stan, and
Yeah.
Stan goes up there, and the guy's no, no, going crazy, and so he says, get me a blanket,
Yeah.
and he said, bring him a blanket. So he opens up the doors, throws the blanket. Stan's a big guy, throws the blanket around him and kind of pins him, and says, you took a psychedelic substance and you're having a bad reaction. I want you to just go inside and experience what's there." And 20 minutes later, he is walking down the driveway with Stan, laughing about what had happened. He's with his girlfriend again, and if they had called the police and the medical, they would have shot him up with something. And so not everyone's going to be willing to take out a guy with a
Yeah.
knife in a bad trip.
Bloody
Um,
hell. Yeah. Yeah.
Stan's an astonishing person in that way. He really has a lot of trust
Yeah.
in the world, as it were.
Yeah.
Can I mention just one other thing that occurred to me the other day? I was thinking, it seems as people seem to sort of eventually discount. LSD wasn't that important to them, or the psychedelics. They had that, and I wonder, if people don't realize how that actually has influenced them. Having this thing where all reality comes into question, is a big thing,
Yeah.
It really, for me anyway, it really changed, a lot. But I wonder if people begin to sort of take that for granted. And oh yeah, I took the LSD and changed everything. But now I'm just working in at the mill. But I mean, I'm not going anywhere with that, except that I just had this feeling that, as with almost any experience you have over time, it fades, and you sort of forget the significance it may have had at a deep level.
Yes, it definitely makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's so easy to dismiss things. So you have non-ordinary experiences at the time and they have so much impact. But then over time, you start to focus on other things. You're influenced by other opinions, other interpretations, and it can be so easy to tell yourself another narrative which departs from the initial, I suppose, the initial narrative that you had that you derived when immediately after you had the experience. I wonder how much that changes over time. Um, and it's not just psychedelic experiences, it's with NDEs as well. I remember um, coming across this NDE. This guy nearly died at the beach because he decided to dig a hole and the walls of sand fell in on him and he had
Wow.
a heart attack and he had to be dug out. And his experience was he saw everything from above, people rescuing him, the ambulance coming, took his body to the hospital. He tagged along with the ambulance. He felt as though he was being pulled by the ambulance, but he said, I saw no cord or anything like that. And
Mm,
once he arrived at the hospital, he was observing his body, and next to him was a figure, a bearded man, wearing strange clothes. So he said he looked like a wizard, and then the wizard looked at him and said, "If you struggle, you will live. If you let go, you will die." That's all the man said, right? And with that, he suddenly woke up, right? And that passed. So he told this experience to the experts, investigating near-death experiences. He told them that, and then years passed when the investigators visited him at his family home, and he had a big family. The family was all there. The investigators were received with excitement by the family members, and the family members said, "Oh yeah, um, you're here to talk to him. He saw Jesus. He saw Jesus, right?" So the investigators spoke to him aside and said to him, "Well, what do you mean? Why are your family members saying that you met Jesus, that you saw Jesus?" And that's very different from what you told us years ago. And the guy said, "Yeah, I know. Um, to be honest, they made the assumption that I saw Jesus because it's a religious family, and I just went along with it. But my experience was just that the man I saw looked like a wizard, and I have no idea who or what he was. It was just my experience." So you see, over time, interpretations differ. So
Yeah.
I think it's always best to record them straight away in the aftermath of the experience rather than, looking back later and
It's it,
yeah.
excuse me, it's interesting how often people report that they have a decision to make, or they're sent back, or there's they sort of could go either way. That's one of the things that I think it's quite interesting that David Griffin puts in the end of his book on the possibility of survival. And he says, maybe there's a bunch, there could be various options. Maybe you could decide to reincarnate. Maybe you could decide that's enough. Maybe you could decide to go to a different planet. Maybe you could decide, to have mystical union with God for, eternity. I thought, I never really quite thought of that, there could be various possibilities.
That's right. So that would tie in with uh, what Stan says about you get different levels. There's the personal unconscious. So there's consciousness. There's the personal unconscious. There's something like Jung's collective unconscious, which is pertinent to humanity's experience. It's almost like the reservoir of humanity, let's say. And then you would get a deeper level, which
Yeah,
is even vaster, which would be the transpersonal unconscious,
yeah,
which would include experiences beyond the human range of perception. It would be include information from extra dimensional beings or extraterrestrials within our universe. It would be more expansive. It would be like this wider reality. And I'm wondering if um, with some near-death experiences, if the brain, which keeps it all together, it narrows our experience, is so compromised, right, that all the barriers that surround you, which are necessary for your survival, for the preservation of the organism, momentarily falls away, and you begin to let more in from the wider reality. And I'm wondering if telepathy, which could be rare, is most likely rare, could mean that some people in altered states, they could, instead of just accessing stuff from their personal unconscious, they begin to access from Jung's collective, or even go deeper, say with DMT, to access stuff from the transpersonal unconscious. And some people somehow, even rarer, would have the ability to go beyond Carl Jung's collective to begin to access the personal stuff from another mind, another personal mind, let's say, and sometimes, in even rarer cases, access what's actually on the surface level, at the threshold of immediate consciousness. So what someone is consciously thinking could, in extremely rare occasions, be accessed by another personal mind.
Well,
But the default mode would be everyone's cocooned.
I'd seem, I mean, Whitehead thing is his telepathy is once again possible within the system, but not necessary.
Yeah,
But the amount of times I think about somebody and a few seconds later the phone rings and it's them, I think is beyond the coincidence level.
yeah,
So I think these things are happening, but it's very difficult to sort of have a conscious control of them. Because I think they're coming in from the unconscious, you know, we don't have conscious control of them, as it were, except
yeah,
for apparently some exceptional people. For what one last thing, for the transpersonal psychology, I think Whitehead's idea of the prehension is so incredibly valuable because what it says is the entire past is available, flowing in as a possibility into the new occasion. So the human unconscious is the past. So anything that's happened theoretically is accessible, and anything that's happened to anybody, anywhere, is accessible. So it gives a really because the unconscious can be and the collective unconscious, all these things are difficult for me to imagine where they are or how they're somewhat, how do we get where,
yeah,
so if things are just if there's a way for things to that everything functions that way, that past events are available, more or less, likely to be accessible. Certain things, our bodies and our own past are, the most accessible, but under unusual circumstances, a wider access becomes available to, get these extraordinary experiences that people have.
yeah. That's powerfully persuasive, actually. And I've had instances where I've woken up from a dream and I've told this dream to my wife, and then suddenly she's freaked out because it happens to be about something that she was reading on the phone or thinking about, um, which makes me think, oh, there could be something to dream telepathy, and I immediately think maybe while I was having my dream, I was accessing at the same time what she was experiencing, but perhaps it's not quite like that because there's a passage of time. And once I woke up from the dream and I told my wife, maybe the memory of the dream was the accessing of the information. So you're accessing, like you said, you're accessing the
Mm.
past. And because you're accessing the past, somehow it wasn't just my personal past, but also her past, because we're all interconnected. And yeah, sorry, it's just
These
an
things,
alarm. Yeah, so we're all
these things are very
interconnected.
you know, you've just demonstrated, the difficulty in trying to parse out how these things work is one of the beautiful things about David Griffin's book, that Parapsychology of Philosophy, because he's really good at having all this evidence, then going through all the possible ways of looking at it. Because the real problem for almost all these phenomena is the idea of super psi.
Yeah,
If we can access anything, so how would, like, for reincarnation, how would you differentiate between you really had a past life from that you're accessing somebody's past life? You're just, you're in telepathic communication, as it were, with something that happened. And he comes up with some pretty good ways of suggesting one or the other is true. It's quite amazing.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'd recommend that. I think you'd really enjoy it. It
I
also
think
has
I'm
a
I'm,
wonderful,
I'm sold already.
The earlier chapters are a great introduction to some aspects of Whitehead's philosophy too. He's an extremely clear writer.
Yeah.
He, I've got what are the books I've got? His Unsnarling the World Knot, which is looking at the whole mind body, consciousness
Oh, I see.
versus
Yeah.
issue, and he's got Reason and Reenchantment without supernaturalism. And then he wrote a number of books on American imperialism, which are pretty devastating. You know,
Right. I can imagine. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And he also
That's
became
another
quite
topic,
interested.
isn't it?
He
Yeah.
also became quite interested in the 9/11 controversy
Oh,
uh,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
because he was researching his American imperialism and ran into something online and ended up, looking into that deeply. And
Right. Yeah.
he actually, I think, was considered towards the end of his life, one of the top researchers in that area, which
Yeah.
didn't win him many friends, by the way.
Yeah. I was only going to school when 9/11 happened, and I remember coming home and watching it on the telly and thinking, what the hell is happening here? It's like a Die Hard movie. What's going on? I barely knew anything. And my stepfather at the time, he's no longer with us, but at the time he was looking at the telly and saying, no, it's Mossad. Mossad did this. I didn't even know what Mossad was. I mean, and then eventually I learned about the official narrative and, it's Bin Laden and it's about terrorism and stuff like that. But then I began to wonder, well, is there something deeper that most people don't see? That maybe there is this world of espionage, and there are
Mm.
certain powers that do certain things. Like, it's possible that the Israeli government um, could even use, in the case of the Epstein files, they could use blackmail to, to influence other
Yeah.
world leaders. Maybe this is all a big game of chess that nobody is seeing. We're only being told, the narrative that they want us to believe. It's
One of David Griffin's great lines is, people say, well, those are just conspiracy theories. He said, well, so is the official narrative. That was a conspiracy. It's
yeah,
just, which the question is, which conspiracy is right,
that's right. That's right. I do remember, not many people talked about this, but I do remember um, the FBI arresting two men they thought were Arabs. And basically, these men were celebrating across the river from the Twin Towers, and they were drinking and you know they were screaming with joy as they were watching the towers burn. And people called the police, the FBI, and they thought, well, they must be the terrorists. They must be part of the group of terrorists that made that happen. And these men were arrested by the FBI, but then it turns out they weren't Arabs, they were Israelis. And suddenly the FBI gets a call from on high from the White House saying, you are to release them. And that was that. And this was reported by FBI agents. There were witnesses as well, but there was very little media coverage of what happened. So that is pretty compelling to
there's, there's all, there's all kinds of unusual evidence that I think David ended up writing 4 or 5 books about it. And it's, have you ever seen the movie, God, I think it's based on a series, a television series in England, and it's something. What is it called? Dark something. It's Mel Gibson as this police detective in Boston, and very early on, his daughter, there's some the door. His daughter goes to the door and she's killed by the shot, and so he goes starts investigating what happened. And there's this British man throughout it who's not even he's the kind of guy the CIA calls in when they need somebody even deeper, more
yeah,
hidden. And a couple of times he says, the game here is to make the thing so complex the thing's so difficult to make all the connections that nobody can ever really figure it out in the end, So
Right.
that's the game. And I think that applies pretty widely.
Yeah, yeah. It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. Sometimes it's strange, but we can find uh, reality or some truths within fiction. It's almost like
Yeah.
they are letting us know in a way what's going on.
Well, I mean, it turns out that nearly every fiction writer that writes about spies and James Bond, they're all in they're all spies themselves. They're working
Yeah,
at Graham Greene, and it's of course, as it turns out, almost everybody worked for the CIA anyway, so it's not too hard. It
yeah,
keeps turning up that they work for the CIA,
yeah. And it leaves you wondering what's true and what's disinformation, what's going on. Literally you have a barrage of information and you don't know what to believe, what's veridical. You can only speculate, I suppose, in the end.
I'm a little offended that nobody has ever asked me to be part of the CIA. You know, come on, man.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
I guess they know what they're doing. I wouldn't have been a big asset.
You never know until you try it.
Yeah.
But would you really want to? That's the thing.
I think early on I would have been sort of flattered, with the whole idea, but just as well, I would have been running amok, that's for sure.
Yeah, so would I, most likely. I think I would have got lost pretty quickly, really. I wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I,
Well, this has
I
been
think
delightful.
I think lots of things would eventually weigh on my conscience. How can I do this? How can I keep things from my family? How can I work towards deceiving the rest of the public? What's this all for? Yeah. I've actually got Matt Gray on the phone right now, and I'll tell you
Okay,
what,
yeah.
I'm gonna link you two up because I think is I think Whiteheadian metaphysics is growing on him. So yeah, I think you two would get on like a house on fire. He's
Once it
interviewed
starts
people. Yeah, he's
once it
interviewed.
starts once it starts growing on you, it's hard to get off.
Yeah, he's he's spoken to people like Michael Levin about organisms, planaria. He's spoken to Carl Friston, Donald Hoffman, Susan Blackmore. He's spoken to so many people, Dennis Noble. So I think, and obviously Peter Hughes. What's his name? Peter. I always forget his name now. I had it,
Well,
and now it escapes me.
the pronunciation's always a little risky, but it's I think
Peter
Shajostik.
Sherstedt
Shajostik
Hughes.
Hughes.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, he's interviewed him, and yeah, he's quite prolific and a good interviewer, really. And I think his podcast is even bigger than this one because I feel like I'm only up and coming. But I've had some people on the show, and yeah, I thank you so much for coming on the show. And
Well, tell him I'm a two-trick pony, either Whitehead or Groff. That's all I got.
right, I'll let him know. I'll let him know about that. He wants to read your book. Actually, he's told me about. I mean, I told him I have a copy. But he wants to see if he can, because he lives in Cheltenham. It's a few miles away from where I live, but he wants to get it on audio and read it because he's becoming very interested in Whitehead. So
I don't think it's available as an audiobook though.
right, I have to let him know. If he can't find it,
Um,
I mean, maybe that's the reason why he just called me. Who knows? But
I
yeah, I'll have to let him know.
you
Otherwise,
know
I'm going to have to lend him the copy you sent me.
well if you email me his address, I'll send him a copy.
Oh, is it? Oh, that's very kind of you. Yeah, I'll let him
Sure.
know, definitely.
Happy. I've got a box of them.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I'll give you his email address and maybe he can tell you exactly where he lives because I wasn't paying attention. Because he does like a philosopher's event maybe every couple of months or so, and
Oh,
we all meet in Cheltenham.
oh,
So
cool.
he's got the Cheltenham Philosophers Group. on Facebook, and also his podcast on YouTube, which is Cheltenham and UK Philosophers. But yeah, I met him along with the other philosophers at this pub. And then we all went to his house, and by that time I was already slightly intoxicated, so I can't really remember where he lives. I'd have to
That sounds
rely on him for that. But yeah,
that sounds like fun. It's good fun.
yeah, no, definitely lots of fun. Maybe you can even come down and meet him in person, and we could all get together and have a
I may
laugh
be
with.
we'll be doing a I think we'll be doing a Mind at Large conference in person this time in Exeter next year. So
Oh, is it? Oh,
yeah,
brilliant.
well,
Yeah, I
we're
think that's
talking
how he
about
met
that.
Peter. Because he told me he paid £50 to be part of the one of the events, the Mind at Large events, and that's where he met Peter. So
Hmm.
yeah. Anyway, I'll tell him about you. Definitely, I'll link you two guys up, and yeah, if you can send him a copy, I'm pretty sure he's going to be over the moon.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Warn him about me.
Yeah, I'll warn him. I will. I will. I'll tell him you're a two-trick pony. Yeah. So it's Stanislav Grof and what's the other
Whitehead.
one?
Whitehead.
Whitehead, yeah, Whitehead, yeah. And by the way, he loves Olaf Stapledon as well.
Well,
And
then
he's read the book.
we have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anyway, thanks for coming and thanks a lot for this conversation and hopefully maybe I can have you back because there's so much to cover. I've written so many notes. I mean, the your book is so rich. So and
Well,
I thank you for sending me a copy. Thank you very
you're
much.
welcome. Thank you for having me, Arinda. This has been great.
No worries. Thanks a lot, John. You take care, yeah.
You too, man.